We're talking about her particularly as this cosmic conjurer, this creatrix energy. And part of this energy is the quality of instability. In fact, that is the magic. That's the juice. That's where the actual power of this joy, laughter, circus-like madness kind of energy, the uncertainty actually comes into its highest potential, which is a divine dismantling, a disruption, a sense that something, it's not as comfortable, right, when it happens, but this feeling that something has been moving along, there has been this sense of maybe progress, maybe even building, and then suddenly you hit this space where everything goes awry. It feels like a kind of chaos, but when we are able to be in the heart space, this can be a very ripe opportunity for entrance of the deity. There's this expression that there's no atheist in foxholes. I love that expression because it kind of reminds us that when we get to a certain place, and it will be a different place for all of us, a different state for all of us, but that there will be a place where we break and we surrender to something that is greater and vaster than our limited self-identity, because we have to, in order to survive in that moment, in order to move into the next phase of whatever it is that's happening. It's an instinct. So there is this sense with this instability or this sense of disruption or upheaval that if we can hold that space for it, the deity, however that is for us, whatever it is that we are devoted to, can manifest more fully in that space. And so in that, the instability or the disruption can kind of become a pathway to magic. And it's really helpful to remember that when things do go awry. I remember once when I was one of the first Divine Circus events that I ever ran, and everything was kind of ready to go. And then literally 2 minutes before, we had hundreds of people outside. It was middle of winter, full moon, pouring with rain, so umbrellas and whatever, and we're in this art gallery, you know, ready to open up the doors to let people in for this circus music spiritual performance. And the fire alarms went off just like that, and everything got shut down, and then the fire brigade turned up. And I mean, there was so much joy that the people outside thought it was part of the show. And so these strapping firemen were like coming in and they were like, yay, and cheering. And it was kind of beautiful. But I was also, whilst acknowledging the craziness of not being able to control any of it, because I was kind of in the center of all of this, also having a quiet meltdown because I thought, what is happening? There was no fire, by the way. It was the incense that had set off the fire alarm. Anyway, we managed. We changed gears. It just kind of brought this wild energy, and the whole night was beautiful. But I remember thinking at that time, this is a very potent energy. And sometimes when we think about joy and laughter and the wildness of this circus energy, and Lalita as part of this, which I'll explain that connection in a moment, we forget just how spiritually strong it is and how transformational it can be, and how much, you know, we often lean into our spiritual path to help us find the stability and the consistency and the resilience. And especially if that was missing early on in our lives, we might be looking for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that is available to us through our spiritual path. But we want to take care that with our spiritual path and practice, that we have this attitude of finding that kind of inner spiritual ground and resilience in a way that then allows us to deal with the upheavals that happen whenever we engage meaningfully with the world. Because when you're moving out of the sanctuary of your spiritual practice, suddenly we're not in control in that same way. And if we try to be controlling what other people are doing, we end up in situations that are not healthy and actually block our growth and block the growth of other people. We end up in manipulation and all these sorts of situations that are the opposite of finding freedom and liberation and inviting others and empowering others through our process to have their own journey. So it's a little bit of a kind of unsettling territory to be in. And this is why I feel, even though it seems like laughter and joy would be the very first steps to take on the spiritual path, I actually feel it's actually quite advanced, because what happens when you're open in that space requires a lot of trust. It's hard enough to trust when we're in the intensity and we're feeling things and we can feel the divine presence and we're working through it. But when you're actually going to say to spirit, you know what, if you want to get wild with things, I am going to trust you to do what you need to do. And the other thing that happens out of this, and we'll touch on this a little bit when we talk about the Sri Yantra today, is that we shift our sense of ground when we start to work with this joyful energy. So instead of the ground being the thing that we rely on in the world to try and have a sense of stability and reference, that everything's going to go according to plan, that this is going to happen and that's going to happen. We do what we can, but we also recognize it is shifting sands. Everything is temporary. There's always going to be things that are affecting the people around us that we may or may not know about at the time. We do our best to be consistent and reliable and to show up, but there's always fluctuations because that's life. That's what happens. So the question then becomes, okay, how do we respond to that? And if we can't rely on that to be the stability and the certainty, if we know that no matter how much people have integrity and they love you, and sometimes things are going to go awry, there might be heartbreak, there might be relationships ending or shifting, or jobs that you've loved that change, these things happen. If we can't rely on that, where do we find our security? Where do we find our certainty? And then we end up in this Lalita space, which is about being able to shift our spiritual ground to that element of spaciousness, to being held in the deity rather than having and our own inner relationship and connection with that, even whilst we may feel and experience things going awry in the world around us. We don't have to go into this sense of, oh my goodness, this is terrible. It's just, okay, how are we going to deal with this? But we still feel supported spiritually from within. This is within. This is what we want, especially with things going on as they are at the moment, when humanity as a whole and us individually as part of that, of course, are going through this major change on the planet. We're going through this rebirthing. You probably hear it in the social media space where people are talking about, you know, a new humanity or a new world's being born. And there's different levels of consciousness around that as to what people say it is and what's happening. But I just see it as we're growing, which is part of life. It just happens. So we really need to have this support to allow for this to manifest through us, hopefully in the most beautiful way and the most conscious way and the most creative way. So let's talk about Lalita. So her mother form is where we have the name Lalita. Tripura Sundari. Tripura means three, like beautiful in three places, beautiful in three cities. So what that means is the three worlds or the three dimensions or the three cities, it's a symbolic gesture. It means three different dimensions, but it's referring to a totality. So what it means is her beauty is in every dimension and every possible place. So this reflects her capacity to be with us, whether we're in that foxhole on sliding sands in a moment of joy or just feeling like everything's gone amok and we really need her. So she's there. She also has, there's a 1,000 names. So it's in the texts, the Hindu texts around these different prayers that outline all of her names. Now, it doesn't mean she's limited to 1,000. Again, it's symbolic. It's actual. She literally has 1,000 names, but it's also this symbolic aspect of she has these infinite forms that will arise and respond depending on what we need. And so when I'm talking to you now in the moment about the three different forms of her, there may be certain forms that you think, you know, this makes sense for this in my life, or I really resonate with that form. But it's all part of this one divine mother being. And one of the names that are associated with Lalita as Sundari relates to her as the great mother. So it's like this idea that she's the primordial creatrix. And when we look at like Shakti Tantras, for example, so these are traditions that arise out of India and focus on the divine feminine as the primordial power. There's this relationship between Kali and Lalita. So Kali is like the dark face and Lalita is the bright face, but they're not separate beings. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Now, the idea of the three is important because when we're going to look at her key forms, we're going to look at her as the maiden or the child, the mother and the crone. So the mother version, let's talk about that first. This is where we get the name Sundari or Lalita. What I love about her is she juggles. And when you think about the divine feminine, or any busy, especially busy women, but I would say any busy human, that, you know, they are masters at juggling different elements of doing this, doing that. So she's literally a juggler. She conjures, she creates magic. It's said in the tantras that she loves to create things out of flowers. So she'll just like make a dance hall, or like make a bower to sit in, or a sacred space. And it reminded me, when I was reflecting on that, of that line, the poetic line by, I think it's Ralph Waldo Emerson, who says the earth laughs in flowers. It's beautiful. So she creates things out of flowers. The other thing I love about her is that she speaks in riddles. She's a bit of a Zen master in a way. And it's said that when Krishna is the seductive, charming, masculine aspect that can just totally intoxicate us in an unhealthy kind of dysfunctional expression. That energy is like those they're those Netflix specials on con men or women on dating apps that like steal people's money from, you know, Tinder or whatever. So that seductive energy has a dysfunctional quality. There's no doubt about it. But when it's aligned and it's operating in a healthy way, it can be the attraction and the joy that draws us to our higher path and purpose, because it ignites the heart and opens the heart. It is the energy that can attract us to the spiritual path and to the quality of light. And when we fall in love with music, or we feel moved by a piece of music, that's that Krishna quality. So it's got something beautiful about it, but it can also be a little bit out of control. It can become seductive where it's not so healthy. It can disconnect us from the truth of what we need to do in the moment. Maybe we need more discipline, or maybe we need to say no to something in order to focus on nurturing something that's happening on our path. So Lalita is known to stand up to Krishna, and Krishna's basically God. So she's not taking any BS from the masculine energy, and she's known to do it in a way that's quite sassy and with like witty retorts. She just doesn't take any bullshit. And she's also known to step in if a feminine being is being too docile or letting the masculine get away with too much. She'll step in and go, "Stand up for yourself, girl. Like, what are you doing?" So this is not about men and women arguing. We can think of it in that way, but I think that's too limited. This is about the part of us that sometimes might feel that our desire nature, or our passion to run after something, or even our demand that we just continually transcend, might be too strong for that feminine part that needs to feel and be present in the moment. Maybe it needs time to integrate and really kind of ground. So it's this balance between these two energies, and this not accepting any nonsense that Lalita is really known for. So she's bright goddess in this mother form, but she is also kind of tough love, which is an interesting element of this. So again, there's this quality of joy and laughter, and her playfulness and creativity and making beautiful spaces, and her love of beauty, kind of tempered and woven through this is this strength and this sense of having that strength. So there's no doormatishness in sight anywhere with her. The other thing that is known about Lalita is that she loves puja. So puja, that's just the word from the cultural matrix that she arises from. But puja is ritual, prayer, spiritual practice. And what's so interesting is that it's taught that we can only worship her if she wants us to. Now, that's really interesting, because what that means is if we feel within our hearts that we want to do practice where we connect with this bright feminine, where we want this joy and this creativity, and we also want the strength to be able to set boundaries and be wise, it's like an okay from her, or a permission from her, because otherwise we wouldn't be feeling it in our hearts. We wouldn't have the inclination to do it. We wouldn't actually sit down and do it if we didn't have that authority from her. That's this beautiful little twist with this teaching. So there is a sense that when we feel we want this, she wants it too. And I think that can be a nice encouragement, because there is a discipline. And this is probably not allowing the Krishna part to run away with, you know, wanting to be in the bliss all the time, but actually being able to say, hey, I just need to show up and do my practice and take care of the discipline day to day. Because the other thing that someone said to me once, which has really stayed with me, is that there are beings on the inner planes that are waiting for you to feed them with your practice. So with your light, it's not only what you do for yourself, but imagine that if you're ever lacking in motivation to do your meditation or your dance or your prayer or whatever it is that generates light in you, every time you do it, there will be beings that you are feeding and they will be needing that light. Just like maybe there's a friend that you have that you speak to sometimes when you're having a bad day or whatever, and you just know if you talk to this person, they're going to give you something that you need. It might be some like joke or some kind of uplifting or encouraging energy. It's something that you need to help you just kind of feel like, you know what, I've got this, I can deal with it, and you move on. So there is this sense of that importance with her and honoring her through ritual and through practice and the benefits that come from that. So that's Lalita as the conjuring mother. Now, she also has two other forms. One is Bala. I'm kind of obsessed with this form. Bala is the 9-year-old girl, and she's a total tantric inversion of cultural mores. So first of all, daughter worship is not really a thing in India. Again, this is the culture that this goddess arises from, but this can be applied universally. So first of all, we're worshipping the daughter as divine being rather than the boy, which is normally the young Krishna is normally worshipped as God. So we have this inversion, first of all, bringing the feminine forward. Secondly, she's not soft. So Bala is known as Lalita's breath. She's really the instinct to move. And when we connect with her energy, it's a sense of something really wanting to happen. And the child energy in this case is not soft. She's a warrior, Bala. Like what actually happens in the Tantra stories is that Bala's kind of there and she's twitchy on the side of battlefield. She's like, Ma, let me get amongst it. Like, I want to deal with these demons. And Lalita's a bit worried. She's like, this is my daughter. She's 9. Like, what the hell's going to happen here? And she's just like, don't hold me back. And so Lalita kind of, in her wisdom, says, okay. And then Bala just gets in there and basically decimates all the demons. This 9-year-old, like, doing perfectly executed warrior moves in battle. What does that mean? You know, what does that mean for us? It's not a literal translation. Again, we have to look at this kind of symbolic aspect, but this is about the child or unconditioned instinct, the natural part of us, the authentic part of us that knows not only what it is designed to do, but has the capacity to do it. And if that mother energy, that supportive, structured, playful, protective energy knows that there's readiness for this, it allows this kind of child part. There might be healing that needs to happen, but there is this realization that within us, there is this unconditioned essence that knows exactly what it's meant to do and knows how to do it. And the idea, the metaphor of this, perfect warrior moves is actually that there is this intelligence inside of us that knows what we need to do. It's more being able to trust it and almost having that Lalita part of us, that more maternal or protective part of us, allowing this instinct to happen. And allowing that unconditioned self to have the space it needs to do what it wants to do. So that's that Bala part. The other part is Bhairavi. So she's a form of Kali, really. I'm wearing her husband Shiva's pendant. And I'll say this actually about Lalita in her triple form. She's said to hold all the aspects of the masculine. So Shiva, Brahma and Vishnu. So all of these triple masculine energies she's meant to hold within herself as well. So she's a very complete being, which again relates to her ability to provide whatever's needed, wherever it's needed. So we'll come back to Bhairavi as the crone. Now she's known as a wrathful yogini queen, this Bhairavi aspect of Lalita, this crone aspect. And as a form of Kali, so there's that wrath energy. Now, touched upon this before, but I'll mention it briefly here. Wrathfulness is not violence. Sometimes we misunderstand Kali in that way. Wrathfulness is movement. It's that energy of breaking through fixity or stagnancy. It's that energy of clearing and change. And the yogini in this context, in this understanding, is the one who is able to control latent forces. So if you think for a moment about things that people might talk about when they talk about practicing yoga, or particularly Kundalini yoga, and they talk about the rising of the Kundalini. So the Kundalini being the natural, sometimes it's called like a snake, serpent-like energy, but it's energy that's coiled at the base of the spine. And as the chakras open and heal and we evolve naturally, it rises. It's a natural thing that happens. But there are certain times, certain life experiences, and certain spiritual practices that may cause that to surge. And so Bhairavi, as the wrathful yogini queen, is the facet of the divine feminine in all of us and in the cosmos that manages the process of raising latent energies. So this is also connected to these instincts of Bala and the birthing, mothering aspect of Lalita, bringing forth what is creative. So latent energies is the stuff that's there, but just hasn't kind of been stimulated into awakening yet. This can be abilities from other lifetimes. It's definitely our enlightenment, you know, that process that we are growing into and that is being awakened through us and through our life experiences and our spiritual journey. So when you put all these together, what you have is this kind of golden, bright, joyful, playful, mothering energy that births beautiful things and takes no nonsense from anyone or anything and protects, with this unconditioned instinct that arises out of that in that spaciousness, and that is really supported by this wrathful energy that will clear obstacles and make sure that those energies are given the fuel that they need to really bloom and come to life. So Lalita Tripura Sundari in these three forms is really this deeply actualizing, very joyful energy that is about absolute, protected, assured, authentic fruition on our spiritual path. So it is the divine feminine at play. And it is in this way that is natural, intelligent, not controlled, but definitely protected. So there's a wildness in it. And this is where I feel, really need two things: that trust that I talked about in the beginning, because the instability that is inherent in change is part of that process that we have to be okay with. And secondly, the fact that she's so beautiful and so appealing, and we want to move closer to that energy because it does feel joyful. And we do feel the bliss of that and the beauty of that. And we want to see things constructive out of the earth's laughter in flowers. Like, we want to see that beauty and feel it. For those of us that feel very motivated by that or very moved by that, often there's a strong soul connection with the planet Venus, actually, when that's the case. But many of us are very moved by beauty, not superficial, but that deep beauty that we sense in life. And that allows us to kind of feel that pull to move closer to her and closer to this sense of strong feeling that these energies can create.